Hey, my name's Spencer. If I hadn't had a chance to meet you yet, yeah, it's going to be a good Wednesday. It's going to be great. Hey, turn your Bibles to Luke chapter 11. Luke chapter 11, we're going to continue talking about the authority of Christ this week. Man, it's been an awesome study so far this week, and today we're going to read a passage where Jesus starts a fight. I don't know if y'all know that on occasion Jesus started fights in the Bible, and not like fist fights or anything, not like a middle schooler. I know we had a middle schooler back when I was growing up, and we called him Sunshine. I don't know what his name was, but everybody called him Sunshine, and he had like bright red hair. He had a ton of freckles, and he would, back in the day, you didn't get in trouble for starting fights, really, and so back in the day, he would start a fight almost every day, and so he'd walk out onto recess or wherever we're at, and he'd just pick out a guy who's minding their own business, and he'd be like, oh, he wants some of this. And we'd be like, no, dude, he doesn't. He doesn't want, he's playing dodgeball. Like, he doesn't want any of that. And he'd be like, oh, he wants some of this. And he'd walk right up to that guy and just start, and just running his mouth until inevitably, like, somebody would take a swing at him. And then he'd love it. Like, that was his pastime. He'd be like, oh, he wants some of this. And all the time. And so I want to look at a part where Jesus starts a fight. Now, Jesus doesn't bully people, anything like that. He only really starts fights with one specific group of people. Y'all know who it is? Pharisees. But he does start fights, though, because he'll, like, you know, Pharisees had this big rule where they're like, you can't do nothing on the Sabbath. And so he'd wait until the Sabbath and be like, hey, what day is it? Oh, where are the Pharisees at? Let's go heal somebody. And so he'd wait until he gets right up where the Pharisees are and be like, all right, they watching? All right, hey, stand up and take up your mat and let's walk. And they'd be like, oh, heck no. And so he'd start this stuff all the time. So what I want to look at, it's not going to look like a fight at first, but what I want to look at is one of these times where Jesus starts a fight with the Pharisees. So go to chapter 11 of Luke. We're going to be in verse 37. We're going to start there and we're going to skip around a little bit. All right, so verse 37. While Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee, one of that group, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him, so he went in and reclined at the table. All right, so y'all understand the situation? Jesus is speaking, and this Pharisee comes up and is like, hey, man, you want to come eat supper at my house? And Jesus is like, great, let's go. And so verse 38, they're in the house, and it says, now the Pharisee was astonished to see that Jesus did not first wash before dinner. That's it. That's the fight. You know, you're like, the heck? That's not a fight? All he did was not wash up before supper. How in the world is that? Now, should you wash up before supper? Should you wash your hands before you eat? Oh, somebody's passionate. Okay. Yeah! Somebody caught a disease one time. But, yeah, should you wash up before supper? Absolutely. But the Pharisees aren't saying what your mom used to say before supper. The Pharisees, basically what they were doing, Jesus knew, is they had a law about this, like a spiritual law that you had to follow. Wash your hands. All right, where is that law in the Bible? Can anybody tell me? No, it's not in there. There is no verse in the Bible about washing your hands. So what's the deal with the Pharisees and the laws? So basically what they used to do is the Pharisees, over a bunch of decades, lots of years, they would make up a lot of additional laws that you had to follow. All right? And I think it started from a good heart. Like they would see a verse in the Old Testament like this one. We'll put up on the board, Exodus 20, that talks about the Sabbath. Y'all know that law that says basically don't work on the Sabbath. Yeah, so it says this, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Great. That's the law. And so what the Pharisees would do, and I think it probably started out of a good heart, is they'd be like, all right, well, we don't want to break this law, so let's define work. Like, you can't work on the Sabbath, so what's work? Okay, so probably doing this and doing that, and that's probably work, and this is probably work. They actually came up with 39 different categories of things you couldn't do on the Sabbath. Things like this. There is no cooking on the Sabbath. There's no washing, no sowing, no planting, no reaping, no burning, no tearing. That's really specific. No extinguishing, no carrying, and the list went on and on and on. Now, none of that list is in the Bible, but they're trying to define a law that's in the Bible. And some of these guys were like really OCD or something, so they take it like a level deeper and be like, okay, so let's take the law no tearing. What can and can't you tear on the Sabbath? And so they got down to the nitty gritty. They'd say you can't tear paper on the Sabbath, or that's work, which leads me to the question, toilet paper. What you do in that situation? Like it's perforated. Does that count as a tear? Did you know? I looked this up. There are some modern Orthodox Jewish bathrooms that provide pre-torn squares of toilet paper in the bathrooms. That's crazy. And so they would take laws like, hey, don't plant anything on the Sabbath, and they'd be like, so you probably shouldn't touch a plant on the Sabbath. So no climbing trees, no smelling flowers. All right. First off, if you can't go to the bathroom or smell a flower on the Sabbath, you're living wrong. Like it's a bad day. And so they would add all these different laws, but what's crazy is what they started saying is, this is what makes you right with God. You follow every one of these additional laws, and now you're right with God. And eventually, over time, they became really good at following these laws, but they stopped even trying to really follow God. And Jesus is recognizing that in the Pharisees. That's the main thing he targets. In Mark 7, he says this about the Pharisees. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Basically, these guys had developed ways to look godly without actually having to be. For real, why would you try to do that? Who you looking godly for if you don't care anything about God? It's obviously all about people. That's what Pharisees live for. They live to look good in front of people and to be able to control people, to hold people under their thumb. And so you can see this is why Jesus picks a fight about the washing hands thing. It's not arbitrary, right? And so he goes over to their house. He knows they got a law about the Sabbath, and you got to do this, and you got to do that. You got to wash your hands. And so they're basically, y'all ever been to an awkward supper, awkward dinner party, something like that? Like this one is super awkward because right now the appetizers hadn't even come out yet. There's no fried mushrooms on the table, and Jesus is about to go hard because basically they're like, hey, man, you going to wash your hands? And he looks him in the eye and is like, nope. All right, watch this. He goes even harder. It says, verse 39, and the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. You fools. Did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give his alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you. I mean, talk about an awkward dinner party. What he's saying to these guys is, hey, if you paid as much attention to cleaning the heart as you did the hands, you'd be all right. But he compares them to this cup. He's like, you clean the outside of this cup, but the inside is nasty. Like, look at this cup right here. You got that picture? Yeah. Did y'all drink out of that coffee cup? Heck no. I remember I had a professor in college who he had a cup look just like this. It was a Chicago Cubs cup. And he'd be like, squeaky, squeaky. Like, get the outside all squeaky clean. And I'd be like, yo, there are diseases living inside that cup. You're dying slowly. Like, no, nobody drink out of that. That's what Jesus is saying. These guys, all right, pause. I got a story. So there was a lot of years ago, about 10 years ago, me and Brody and 3 other guys, we were going to help a friend out. And so he basically needed these chicken houses cleaned out. You know what chicken houses are? Like those long row houses that you see. It wasn't full of chickens. It was full of furniture. But it was in Georgia during the summer, and so it was hot as heck. Like it was like 100 degrees down there. And so we're going down there. We got a full truck, and we're going to go down and help this guy clean out his chicken house. All right. So if you're from the South, you'll know what I'm talking about. But we borrowed this guy's truck, and this guy was a dipper. Know what I'm talking about? Ding! You know, like tobacco spit. You know, so if you've ever hung around a dipper, you know you can't trust a Coke bottle. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you get around them, you're like, oh, that's not Coke in that bottle. I know what that is. That is warm dip spit. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, me and Brody hop into the front of this guy's truck, and we know he's a dipper. And so there's 3 guys in the back of the truck, me and Brody in the front. We hop in the truck, and in between us there sits one of those glass Frappuccino bottles, you know, like one of those mocha Frappuccinos. And we're like, that is not Starbucks. And so we just kind of laugh, you know. And so we start heading down to Georgia. We go all the way down there. We are cleaning this chicken house, and it gets so hot in this chicken house. And I'm telling you, we're sweating and working. And we had this guy with us. He don't work here anymore, but his name's Hank. And and he Man, he started whining and complaining so much, and he was like, "It's so hot, man. It stinks, man. It's so hot. I gotta get something to drink." And we're like, "Man, shut up, man. We gotta work. Just let's go. We're gonna go to the gas station after this. We'll get a Gatorade and be like, it's so hot. How much longer we gotta go?" And finally, like, we're at the end of the day, and he's like, "I can't wait, man. We gotta go to the gas station." We're like, "Dude, shut up." And so finally, we load back up into the truck. All of us sweat through all our clothes, and Hank, y'all see where this is going. Hank jumps in the truck and he sees that Frappuccino bottle and he goes, "I'm drinking it." And he opens it up, and me and Brody just go, "Huh?" And just like look at each other like, "Uh-oh," saying nothing. And he goes, and he doesn't just like take a little sip. My boy takes three giant swallows, and you see in the middle of his drink, you see him like, okay, I saw this guy this weekend, and I laughed my butt off. You see him like in the middle of drinking, he pulls it out like this, and he makes this tiny noise. It's like, and we start like, bah! We start dying laughing, and like he's like, oh my gosh, because nah. And so like, that thing's been cooking in that car for who knows how long. Woo! Warm, this much Frappuccino. Anyway, and so about 10 minutes later, we're just like, we're just laughing. And about 10 minutes later, we look back in the rear view, and he's got his head like smushed up against the window because it's all cold, and he's like, "Man, shut up. Man, shut up." He's feeling bad. And about 10 minutes later, we hear that window roll down, and my boy's just like, "Oh," out the window, but he's like half throwing up, half crying. And so he's like, "Oh," like, and we're dying laughing. He's like, "Pull over." And we're like, "No." And so he just gets madder and madder. He's like, "Shut up, help." And, man, it was my favorite day. I loved it. So, that story comes to mind for real every time I read that verse, because I'm like, you clean. It's not like what's inside is crucial, right? It don't matter what the outside of the cup looks like inside. It could be terrible, right? So Jesus is at this dinner party. He's like, "Hey, you clean the outside of the cup, but the inside is nasty." Really, what he's saying is, it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside. It doesn't matter what you act like on the outside. Who are you on the inside? That's what really counts. You can fool people, but you're not fooling God. Now, he goes on, verse 42. He's still at the dinner party. He's going wild, and he said, "Woe to you, Pharisees! You tithe mint and rue and every herb, but you neglect justice and the love of God. These things you ought to have done without neglecting the others." He's saying, hey, you make sure that people see you dropping your tithe in the bucket. You even tithe your house plants. I got a mint plant in my house. That means they took a tiny leaf off of that plant, bink, and make sure everybody see, hey, I'm giving my leaf to God. But then he's saying, you don't love God. You don't care about other people and them being oppressed. You're making sure you look good in front of people. Verse 43, he says, "Woe to you, Pharisees! You love the best seats in the synagogues and the greeting in the marketplace." He's basically saying, you love to be noticed, but you don't notice others. You love to be praised, but you don't praise others. You love to be worshiped, but you don't worship God. What they valued was what they looked like in front of people on the outside, but not what they were like in front of God on the inside. So skip down to chapter 12. Now he's done with the supper party, and he's with a big group of people. He's going to be with a group of thousands, all right? And he's going to address what just happened at the supper party, the point of the fight. Verse 1, chapter 12. "In the meantime, when so many thousands of people had gathered together that they were trampling one another, he began to say to his disciples first, 'Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy.'" All right, that's what we're really talking about, that they're hypocrites. Y'all know what hypocrisy is? You know what being a hypocrite is? Basically, a general definition is like saying one thing and acting a different way. You know what I mean? Like saying one thing and doing another thing. That's in general, but that's not specifically the way that Jesus is using it here. Y'all know, y'all have heard a bunch of people say, hey, the reason I don't go to church is because it's so full of hypocrites. Y'all ever heard that? Church is full of hypocrites. You hear that all the time. If you haven't heard it yet, you're going to hear it. Here's the question. Is the church full of hypocrites? There's probably some hypocrites in the church, but here's what I want you to think about. The church is full of sinners, and that's different. Because sinners and hypocrites are different because really sinners are people that want to follow Jesus, that's their goal, that's their intention, that's what they're trying to do, and they sometimes fall short. A hypocrite, Jesus is addressing a different group of people. These are non-Christians who are acting, they're pretending to love God, and inside they know, I don't care a thing about God. They know the inside of the cup is nasty, and they're totally fine with living that way, with acting, with pretending. And Jesus is warning this huge group of thousands, don't be like that. Don't become this type of person, because he's saying just like leaven or yeast in bread, hypocrisy grows. It spreads. I don't know if you ever made bread, but like the yeast is what spreads through the bread and makes it rise. He's saying hypocrisy grows in a group. Hypocrisy grows in yourself. Once you're willing to pretend in one area, it'll grow. Now the Pharisees, they're happy at this point. They think they got everybody fooled. Here's the point of Jesus' fight, and here's where it's going to get serious for us. Verse 2, and I want you to think about this in the context of hypocrisy. Jesus says this, nothing is covered up that won't be revealed. Nothing is hidden that won't be known. So whatever you've said in the dark will be heard in the light. Whatever you've whispered in private rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops. What's he saying? He's like, man, nothing that's hidden is going to stay hidden. And that's for the Pharisees, but it's also for us. When's he talking about? He's referring to the last day, the judgment day of God, when all of us, for real, this is really going to happen. All of us are going to stand and give an account of our lives. Now, for believers, that's not going to determine our salvation. That's already done in Christ. But like, there is going to be a day where all of our actions, all of our thoughts, all of our words are going to be revealed, where nothing's going to be like secret. It's just going to be reality. Is that scary? Dude, that is so scary. Imagine if we did that this week. Imagine if we're like, hey, for the skit today, we got your actions and thoughts for the last week on the board. Ready? Everybody check it out. We'd be like, heck no, I'm out of here. Like, we'd be leaving. If all of your thoughts from the last week were on the board, that'd be so scary. But if you really think about it, on that judgment day, man, everybody that matters already knows. God already knows what will be on that board. And so do you, really. He's already seen your thoughts from last week. Now, we do things in front of God that we would never do in front of our family. Things in front of God that we'd never do in front of our friends. Now, some of that's because God's everywhere and people are not. But if we're okay pretending in one area or pretending in front of people, but not really caring what God thinks about us, like it may be that we fear men and love men more than we fear God and love God. So Jesus is going to talk about fear. Verse 4, and here's where it's going to get more serious. He says this, I tell you, friends, don't fear those who kill the body and after that have nothing more they can do. What's he talking about? He's like, don't worry about what man can do to you. And I think there's two aspects here. First one is basically saying, don't fear the bad things that people can do to you. Like, don't be scared. The worst thing people can do is kill you. And I think for these guys, there's a real threat. And he's saying, don't fear death. But I think the other aspect pulling from the Pharisees that he's saying is, hey, don't live your life in fear of other people and what they think about you. Like, if other people become your primary fear in life, if what people think becomes what you primarily serve with your choices and your attitudes, that's the character of hypocrisy. That's the fear of man. If we're constantly only worried about the outside of the cup and not the inside, then people become at the same time your greatest love and your greatest fear. Essentially, that's what you worship. So Jesus is fixing to tell us you need to have greater fears than that. Verse 5. Here's where it gets real serious. He says this, I will warn you who to fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. All right, there's our word for the week, authority. Y'all see it? Fear him who has the authority. Who has the authority to cast people into hell? Does Satan? Does Satan cast people into hell? Does he have that sort of authority? Heck no. Satan absolutely does not have that sort of authority. And in addition, like, we're never told to fear Satan in the Bible. Y'all realize that? The Bible never says be scared of Satan. It says things like be watchful. It says things like don't give him opportunity. We're not told to fear him. We're told to resist him and he'll run. He'll flee. So who is it talking about here? Who has the sort of authority over heaven and hell and who goes where? God does. So is it telling us to fear God? Yeah. And so that we're not confused, he repeats it. I'll warn you who to fear. Fear him who after he is killed has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. It's repeated for emphasis. What I want us to think about is this. There's a fear of God that's healthy and preventative because it keeps us from valuing what's not worth valuing. Fear of God reorders our fear of other people. Fear of God reorders our fear of other people. I'll tell you a quick story. I knew a guy once who he was, when he was little, when he was young, he was a kid, he had a Coke bottle in his hand, and he's bouncing it, like on the ground. I don't know. He's just bouncing on the ground, and it just had one of those freak bounces and bounced up, and the cap part hit him right in the open eyeball. Bing! And he was like, oh, my gosh. But it hurt so bad, but he was scared that he was going to get in trouble, so he didn't tell his parents. Well, then the next day it kept hurting, and the next day it kept hurting, and then a few days after that it kept getting more blurry. And then more blurry and more hurting, and he was so scared to tell his parents, and his eye kept getting worse and worse to the point where he started getting kind of dim in that eye, and he finally was like, hey, I got to go to the doctor. He goes to the doctor and basically over time loses that eye. Like he's walking around today with one eye. And it was crazy because when he gets to the doctor on that final day, he's like, hey, you should have come in months ago. We could have totally saved your eye. And it's like, oh my gosh, this dude he should have had bigger fears. He was so scared he was going to get in trouble, but not scared that he was going to lose his eye. Man, that bigger fear that I'm going to lose my eye should have pushed out the smaller fear of I'm going to get in trouble. I think that's what he's saying here, that a fear of God reorders our smaller fear of other people. Get things in priority. And here he says, you think about why should we fear God? Yeah, it's because everything's going to be uncovered, but here he talks about hell. And y'all, hell is not a topic that we talk about a lot, and it is not pleasant to talk about. But it's important that we talk about it. I mean, have you ever read about hell for real? It is terrifying. It hurts my stomach to even think about it. But it's a terrifying place, and I don't understand everything about it for sure, but everything I read tells me I do not want any part of it, right? Because it's more than fire. It's a place of punishment. It's a place of destruction, a place of exclusion. And to be real, people are heading there today, quickly. Y'all know 2 people die on average every second. Every second, 2 more, 2 more. 2 more, and a large number of them are pouring into hell. That is terrifying. I think Jesus is putting things in perspective because basically this week we've been talking about the authority of Jesus, and we've seen so far he has authority over fish. He has authority over nature. He has authority over Satan. He has authority over legs. He has authority over sins. But what he's saying in this passage is there is no greater authority than to determine where people spend eternity. Yes, Jesus is reminding people he is absolutely in control of everything at all times. He holds the universe in between his fingers, right? He keeps our hearts beating right now, but he's going further now to say he has authority over souls. Just thinking about that should shake us awake and make us think, why on earth would I be ruled by what people think about us? By what people think about me when Jesus has all authority? We should be living for an audience of one, for real. Scary stuff. Look at the next verse, though. The next verse, he changes tone so quick, you're like, wait, what? Because he's been talking about fear the one who can throw body and soul into hell. Verse 6, are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? And you're like, huh? Why are we talking about sparrows? After that, talk about hell. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies and not one of them is forgotten before God? Y'all know what a sparrow is? A sparrow is literally the most forgettable bird on the planet. They're everywhere. They're ugly. You can't eat them. Nobody buys them. They can't even sing. They go, ah! They're the worst bird on the planet. I can see if God were to say, I care for the eagles and the hawks. Yeah, that makes sense. They're pretty awesome. But he says, I care for the sparrows. All right, it gets even more confusing. Verse 7. Even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, for you're of more value than many sparrows. Now, the phrase, even the hairs of your head are all numbered, it never really impressed me because I think science knows how many hairs you got on their head. Now, for me, 4. Like, it's pretty easy. But, like, for you guys, I thought, man, science knows how many hairs we have on our head. This doesn't impress me. What's he saying? I went into a little deep dive. Did you know that if you're a redhead, you have 90,000 hairs on your head on average? If you have black hair, you have 100,000 hairs on your head, give or take. If you have brown hair, you have 110,000 hairs. And if you're a blonde, you have the most hair. Congratulations. You have, on average, you have 150,000 hairs on your head. Who cares? For real, when I read this verse, I'm like, okay, so he knows how many hairs I got. But then I went deeper and I thought about this. You know, the number of hairs on your head is constantly changing. You lose 50 to 100 hairs per day. You know, at any point, 91% of your hair is growing, and 9% of your hair is either paused or is about to fall out. It's constantly changing. What is he saying with these verses? I think the piece about the sparrows means that he loves the unlovely and the common and the insignificant, and the piece about the hairs means he is constantly tuned into what's going on in our lives. Every second we're changing, and he's keeping up. He is near to us. He sees the inside of us, and he still loves us. See, here's the thing. Jesus is in complete control, has all authority over hell. But what he chooses to do is offer heaven. That's a big deal, because fear is a crucial part of the message, but it's not the whole message. And if we just stop there, we miss the point of the gospel. I think God's got you here on purpose this week. And I think part of that is that you would know how he feels about you, his plans for you. And if you've ever wondered, how does this all-powerful God think about me? How does he feel about me? Look at the gospel. Look at what he did for you. Because Jesus, the one with all authority over waves and legs and heaven and hell, died for you. That should tell you how he feels about you. He loves you. Romans 8, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who didn't spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? It's God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died, more than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. So in a sense, yeah, we are to fear God's judgment in a sense, like it keeps us in check. But here in verse 7, he says, fear not. Over and over and over in the Bible, he's like, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. It's one of the most common teachings in Scripture. Over 100 times we're told, don't be afraid. So which one is it? Be afraid. Don't be afraid. Be afraid. Which one is it? Here's what I think it is. We're supposed to learn the fear that makes us fearless. Learn the fear that makes us fearless. Because fearing God frees us from fearing death. Fearing God frees us from fearing others. And those are the two primary fears of man, is other people and God. See, here's the point. The one who knows all your hairs also knows all your faults. He sees all your screw-ups. And that's a potentially scary thought. King David, you remember that prayer where he prayed like, oh God, you search me and know me. You've seen me all together. If I go to heaven, if I go to the grave, you're there. You know every word before it's on my lips. It's a potentially scary situation. But David's totally freed from fear because he says, so search me, know me, and clean me from my hidden faults. See, the only ones with something to fear are the ones who are pretending. The ones who aren't at the inside who they are on the outside. And I'll tell you this, if you're here this week and you don't belong to God, I think this fear of God is supposed to wake us up, because what he says is going to come true. But man, he offers salvation today. That's why he's got you here. If you're a believer, here's the deal. He is going to expose what's on the inside, but do you know for a believer what's on the inside of you? The deepest part of you, the thing that gives you your identity. Do you know when he looks at the inside of you, do you know what he sees? He sees Jesus. That's the deepest part of you. That's what gives you identity. The fear of God helps us to reorder our other fears and live for an audience of one. Last thought. The one who has all authority and all power over heaven and hell, the one who sees to the deepest part of you, if you're a believer, he also fixes the deepest part of you. That's available for you if you're a non-believer today. That He, the one with all authority, he comes to live inside of you and cancel your sin and declare you righteous. And that's real authority.